So we're talking about the 5 ingredients of impactful methods. Impactful meetings, which methods forms a part of that. When Greg and Jimmy spoke to us about, what would be the opportunity or the chance of us coming to a session like this and what would we be able to offer in an hour, this immediately came to mind for me because I think it is one of the lowest hanging fruits in an organization that you can change slightly to have amazing results. And we've seen this in the work that we do. So, Greg has spoken a bit about what we do. I am currently based in Berlin and Cape Town, so partly. And this really is to enable the work that we do with these types of organizations across the world, from governments to think tanks, to NGOs, to political parties. And the challenges that we've seen in organizations really are across the board, almost similar, which is comforting in a way to know that, as humans are organizations, and where there's humans, similar challenges arise, which means that similar solutions are also available to all of us. And that's what I'd like to share with you today in this short session, which I know will also be in some way a conversation starter rather than a complete conversation. But I'm hoping that it will be practical, that you can walk away with some really tangible things that you can try out in your next meeting as we go along. So let me actually start off by asking you to put in the chat, and I love that we are an intimate group because that means we can actually have more time for engagement. If I can ask you to just put in the chat, firstly, where are you joining us from? Just the city and the country. If it's not South Africa, that would be great. So I can get a clearer sense of where everyone is joining from. Okay. Laika from Johannesburg. Hello. More Johannesburg. Great. Thank you. Cape Town is also representing Johannesburg. Okay. So we've got quite a Joburg heavy group, which is fantastic. I mean, it is the economic hub of our country. So that makes sense that people in Joburg are interested to join a session like this. The second question I want to ask is, if you think about the meetings that you do have on a regular basis, let's say the last week of the meetings that you have, that you had, what percentage of those meetings would you say, those were great meetings? Yes, I could not have gone without that one. That one should not have been an email. Can you give me that sort of instinctive percentage of those types of gatherings that you've had in the last week? Maybe 2 weeks would also work. 50%, 33, 50, 55. Okay. So funny enough, even just with this type of information, the statistics show that, on average, managers spend about 20%, 20 hours, which is about 50% of their kind of normal working day in a week they spend in meetings. And of those meetings, roughly about 50% are impactful meetings. It's the ones that they went, that was great, which is shocking and alarming if you think about it. So this idea of why do we have meetings in the first place if they're not fantastic meetings, if they're not adding to what we're doing as an organization? This question really is, for me, one of the key questions that we hope to answer and hope to solve and make better in the world, in the work that we do across all of those organizations. And the first question there is, okay, so why do we gather? Why do people gather? I think the short answer for many of those non-impactful meetings is actually that there's perhaps some underlying anxiety from the manager who actually just wants to feel like they're doing something. And now they're dragging people into a meeting which is basically just an opportunity for them to think out loud in the presence of others. These are not meetings that are impactful. It leaves people with a sense of, why was I there? I need to leave the meeting so that I can do my work. So I want to start this question about why we gather with a helpful framework from a guy called Daniel Kim, who's a professor at MIT, because I think it gives us a sense of what the ideal reason and perhaps the opportunity is in meetings when we gather. So I want to share this framework, and I will say as a caveat that I could do a whole session just on this very framework, but I wanted to share it as an introductory framework for you to answer this question of why we gather and what actually is the purpose of meetings in an organization. So Daniel Kim was really interested in this idea of what makes a team successful. What lies at the heart of a team's ability to deliver successful results? And so he asked this question: what determines the quality of the results in a team? Because let's face it, ultimately, as a team, we are interested in the results. It's if we don't deliver quality results, then what are we doing? So quality results for him and for you perhaps could be anything from the product that you are offering, the service that you are offering, the promises you make to your clients or to your audience, your stakeholders. What is it that people hope to get from you? Your deliverables, essentially. So if Daniel then, asked the question, what leads to high quality results in a team? And in his research with organizations and with teams across the board, the answer was then, well, quality of actions. And yeah, sure, that makes sense. If we take higher quality actions as a team, it will lead to higher quality results. And here we can group actions sort of as, these are the skills that are required in a team. If we have the skills, we can also take better actions. Are the skills that we have relevant to the work that we're trying to achieve? Are we competent in the area that we need to do it? Do we have a plan? Are we flexible to adjust that plan as the situation changes? And you can look at those two things and go, yeah, sure, of course. And often when organizations come to us for sessions, for development work and so on, they often are focusing on these two components because they think that, this is where we need to solve higher quality results. If we learn, we invest in skills, we invest in the relevant skills, we must develop a strategic plan, and then that will make the results better. But Daniel then went a step further and he said, okay, well, what actually leads to higher quality actions? And then it became a little bit murky. Then he got all sorts of questions, also all sorts of different answers. It starts fraying a bit because people aren't able to really quantify what exactly is the thing that leads to quality actions. And of course, him being the persistent researcher that he is, eventually landed at this answer when he brought all of the data together, that the quality of our thinking and engagement together as a team is what leads to higher quality actions and therefore quality results. And under thinking and engagement here, we can put, it's the type of conversations we have together. Meetings could fall in this category, but it can also be the more informal conversations that we have. It's the behavior that we have towards each other. And it's also an opportunity for us to reflect together as a group, but also reflect individually, so that we can have clearer thinking about what it is we want to achieve, so that we can take better actions and therefore deliver better results. And lo, there is a fourth step in this cycle, as you will have gathered from this large empty spot on this cycle. Daniel Kim then asked, okay, so what leads to quality thinking and engagement? And here it got even more murky, more tricky. And eventually his research found that it is the quality of relationships that leads to quality thinking and engagement, and then the rest, which is interesting, obvious in a way when you look at it and you think about it, but sort of surprising because we don't often think about the quality of relationships in an organization as the thing that needs investment. When we talk about quality of relationships here, we can include things like having a shared purpose, being on the same page in terms of where we're heading, having a shared vision. Our values are in alignment with our own personal way of thinking, but also in terms of the organization's values. There's trust and safety in the team. There's team learning as well. This is what we can group under what allows for quality relationships, or is visible, is present when there are quality relationships in a team. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Think about how working with a colleague that you've worked with for years, that perhaps has even become a friend over the years, how much easier it is to work with a colleague like that than someone that you've just met, or someone from a completely different department. You're in a way still figuring out, okay, what is appropriate? Maybe if I say something that this person takes in the wrong way, it can completely derail our collaboration. It can lead to, I don't know, a conflict, or it can lead to awkward situations. Whereas if you're working with someone where there's a strong relationship, I know that I trust you. And so I'm not going to take offense by this thing that you said, because I know that's not how you mean it, because I know you. And so when we look at this, you say, okay, oh, cool, that makes sense. We can see that works. And it's called a cycle of success because it is reinforcing. So when you have quality relationships, quality thinking, quality actions, and therefore quality results, everybody likes to be on a winning team. And so the quality of our results then again impacts those relationships. And we think, we did some amazing work there together. Next time we could do this, da, 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 da. And so there's an upward cycle that takes place. Now, the inverse is also true. When you're not on a winning team and you don't have quality relationships, it can have a downward spiral as well. So in our work, when organizations come to us and they ask us for these sessions, can you teach us how to communicate better? Can you help us, develop a strategic plan? If you scratch a little bit below the surface and you figure out what's really going on below the surface, which takes place here in the relationship and thinking and engagement side of the cycle, that is often where the missing elements lie. And that is where the intervention also needs to take place so that quality results can be delivered. And this framework I find incredibly useful, because if you look at what teams do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, I think we spent too much time in this results and actions side of the spectrum. And it makes sense because results and actions are visible. It's more tangible. We can quantify it. We have KPIs. We can keep track of things. We have project planners, but we don't have project planners for, how are we behaving towards each other? How do you measure that? So it makes sense that we stay in our meetings on the left side of this diagram, but it's in the going deeper part, in the relationships and the thinking and engagement, that ultimately leads to higher quality results. And so I wanted to share that as a base framework for us to keep in mind when we talk about what are the 5 ingredients that lead to impactful meetings. Because I can pause here and ask you, if you just look at this cycle, where in your own team meeting are you lacking the most? What is most challenging for you? What is missing in your engagements? And I can probably make a good case and say, if we had time to go into the 50% of the meetings that did not go so well in the organization, it's probably because something was missing here. There was no shared purpose. There was a lack of clarity in the team. Perhaps we didn't trust each other. We didn't feel like we could say what we really wanted to say. There was no safety. The conversations were bland and one-sided. Not all of us even took part in this meeting. Our behavior towards each other broke down. And so this is what I hope to change in the world, in the work that we do at Anew. So we've come up with what we call 5 ingredients to insert into gatherings, because for us, gatherings are the heartbeat of organizations. I don't want to malign meetings. Meetings in and of itself are not bad. It really is an opportunity for teams to connect, to build trust, to build alignment, and also collaboration so that higher results can be achieved. So I want you to keep that in your mind, and that the goal here is not to get more meetings in your schedule, but the goal here is really to probably have less meetings, but higher quality meetings. And it's in the quality of those engagements where we can speak to some of the underlying issues that Daniel Kim speaks about in his research. So how do we gather? And what are those 5 ingredients? Let me just reveal, lift the curtain a little bit. The first thing I want you to keep in mind is that leaders are facilitators. You are facilitating a process in a team over time. You're facilitating change. You are facilitating meetings. You're facilitating development, gatherings, and so on. And facilitators are designers of conversations. Facilitators think deeply about what is relevant for us to discuss now so that we can move forward, so that we can achieve what we want to achieve. And it's in this design that I want to lift the hood a little bit and say, okay, so where do these ingredients lie? What are the ingredients that should be in here? The first ingredient, I'll quickly go through tell you what the 5 ingredients are, and then I'll go into detail in each of them while applying it to a standard kind of 1-hour team check-in meeting, just as a broad-based example. I would love for you to take notes as we go along, and please feel free to put a question in the chat if there's something urgent. If there's a question of clarity, I've given permission to Nicole to just interrupt me, and so that we can answer it there. But if it's more of a reflective question, there will be space at the end for us to discuss these 5 ingredients in more detail. So the first layer, if you will, is being clear about the purpose of this gathering and the outcomes. You'll notice I use the word gathering and meeting kind of interchangeably. For me, the word gathering is just a bit more complete because it's not just a meeting. Sometimes we have other gatherings that don't necessarily fall into the category of meeting for us, but it is nonetheless people coming together to achieve something in a specific amount of time. So whatever that gathering, clarity of purpose and outcomes is the first ingredient. The second ingredient is the environmental layer. And much like this plant metaphor, if you plant a plant in the wrong environment, it can be the right plant, but in the wrong environment, it's not going to survive. The deepest layer here is the relational layer. This is where trust is built. It's where people can authentically connect with each other. It's where the behavior towards each other allows us to talk about the things that we want to talk in a gathering. And I put it at the deepest part because I think it is often the most missed part of a gathering. And if you recall Daniel Kim's cycle, you'll know that this lies very much at the heart of what he says allows us to have great gatherings or great collaboration in a team. The second layer is the dynamic layer. This you can call sort of the doing layer. It's where a lot of the discussion takes place. It's where decision-making takes place. We'll go into a bit more detail there. And then the final layer is what I call a processing layer or a digestion layer. It's where we make sense of what has just taken place and how do we want to move forward in that. So that, in essence, are the 5 ingredients. And I want to go just in slightly more detail in each of them, while also applying it to a team meeting. Let's imagine it's an internal team meeting, and this is sort of a standard meeting that usually takes place on a weekly basis. I'm sure you have one of those that are standard in your organization. Purpose and outcomes. Here, I want to say that having clarity about the purpose and outcomes of a gathering really should be almost like the bouncer standing at the door of a club. You know, should this meeting take place or not? If you are clear about the purpose of a gathering, it will also tell you whether this gathering should take place or not. And I think for many leaders in organizations, not a lot of thought is being put into what exactly is the purpose of this gathering. The question I like to ask myself about gatherings is not just, why are we gathering? This often differently phrased question might illuminate something for you. So for the sake of what are we having this meeting? Is it to really check in with one another about what we're doing? Or is it, as I said earlier, to just manage our own anxiety that things are happening, that things are going ahead? Is it because I, as a leader, actually want to micromanage? I want to know what my team is doing because I actually don't know what they're doing? Or what really is the purpose of this gathering? And if you can get clarity there, then you can ask yourself the question, okay, well, is it actually necessary for us to put time together to do this? Or is there a different offline asynchronous way for us to have this conversation? From the purpose leads the outcomes. And to get clarity on the outcomes, you can ask yourself this question: what would we like to see exist at the end of this gathering that did not exist before? So here you can think about, maybe it's a decision that we need to take, or there is information that needs to be shared, but it also needs to be discussed. So that understanding needs to exist at the end. Maybe there's alignment that we need to create. Maybe there is some relationship issues that need to be addressed, a conflict that needs to be resolved. So there's a change in relationship that we want to see as an outcome. It could also be that we want to see a change in the mood of the team. Perhaps the organization is going through a difficult time. There's a restructuring happening, or there's something external to the organization that took place that needs some processing. We need to come together as a team. So it's not just always about the decisions we make or about the content we share or the conversations we need to have about the work. Sometimes an outcome can also be a change in the mood in the team that we want to create. But this question, what do we want to see exist at the end that didn't exist before, I think is useful for me to also get a sense of, okay, so if that's what we want to achieve, then how do we build it into the agenda of the meeting? So that's the first layer. Purpose and outcomes, and getting clarity. And those 2 questions would be helpful for you in that process. The next one is the environmental layer. And this one is a little bit more intangible in a way. Because what do we mean by environment? Well, it's not only the physical place where the gathering takes place, but it is also the kind of emotional space that is created. Is there safety? Do people actually feel like they can speak? And the physical space and the psychological, emotional space really go hand in hand, because in a way, the environment sets the tone for how we behave towards each other, what is allowed and what is not allowed. if I show you two pictures and ask you to imagine what kind of conversation do you think will take place in this windowless boardroom that fills me with dread? And I don't know why so many organizations and conference venues have venues like this. It looks like, it's in the bunker of the White House somewhere. You can imagine people sitting around this table and immediately they're taking out their laptops. They're acting seriously because they need to be busy and need to be seen to be busy. And immediately, it takes a formal tone, and it almost takes it's almost like there's a persona that you embody, because that's the type of conversations we associate with an environment like this. If we had the same meeting, but we had it in a place like this, you can immediately see how the tone would be different. The behavior towards each other would be different. Taking out your laptops, everybody sitting in silence and not talking to each other before the meeting starts would probably be weird. But you can imagine people sitting there feeling more relaxed, probably talking about some personal things, what is going on for them, how beautiful it is, probably talk about the weather a little bit. But you can see how just a shift in the environment unlocks a different type of conversation. And this is one of the key things, one of the small changes already people can make in just changing the environment of the conversation that could unlock a different type of conversation. Now, you might not have a beautiful garden like this, but could you go to a cafe close to your office? Could you go for a walk? Is there a park close by that is available that will enable that kind of conversation for us? Or is there just a different spot in our office, an unexpected place where we can have an unexpected conversation? And this applies to online gatherings as well. I think here the choice of platform becomes incredibly important. I know that in many organizations, IT departments have mandated that only Microsoft Teams can be used for gatherings. Microsoft Teams and Cisco WebEx really are the bane of my existence, because I think the choice in platform and how the features come together and what it enables also makes a change. There's a reason why Greg and Jimmy chose Zoom today. The features allow for a bit more collaboration. It's easier to share the screen. We can do breakout rooms if we need to. There's all sorts of additional features that just simply are more easeful than other platforms. And so you can make a case for what is the platform or the environment that would be appropriate for the conversation that you want to have. But the point here about the environmental layer is that changing the environment can change the conversation. And if you find yourself stuck in a particular type of conversation, perhaps this is one of the ingredients you can change in order to change the gathering itself. Let's look at the relational layer. And if we think about a meeting agenda, you could afford about 20% of your time that you have to this relational layer. The most important point there is the first point, that connecting well is what enables people to work well together. So think about Daniel Kim's cycle. How we connect authentically with each other determines how we collaborate and whether we can take quality actions together. And it's important that we take this layer seriously. It's not the nice to have. It's not the, warm fuzzy things we do at the start that we have to do somehow. It really, based on Daniel Kim's research, is the thing that enables people to take quality actions together and therefore deliver quality results. It may feel uncomfortable first when you do it, but persevere and stick to it, and you'll see that it does offer some shifts in a team. The key thing is that authenticity is required here. So it needs to be appropriate for the team where they are in terms of their trust levels, in terms of how they work together, so that it doesn't feel contrived. And one way you can do this is by using rounds. literally giving everybody in the room an opportunity to speak. So in my example here, let's imagine it's a 5-person team or a 8-person team. So you would be able to have a quick round around the table where everybody can share, maybe in response to a particular question. And so here I want to offer you 3 levels of questions that you could start off a meeting based on how much trust there is in a team. So these ones, minimal disclosure, is where there's a low level of trust. So people might not feel like they can disclose a lot about themselves yet. Here you could start off a meeting with one of these 2 questions. What is something you're celebrating in your life and you'd like us to celebrate at the moment? Or what do you most want from our time together? This allows people to just speak at a meeting, arrive because they have spoken, and allow them to sort of be part of the meeting. If you have a little bit more trust in a team, you might offer one of these 3 questions. So what do you most value in our organization or in our team? Maybe you can say, what do you most value about the work we've done so far this year? What question are you thinking about these days? Could be relate to the work, it could relate to something else, but it allows for people to share a bit more about themselves. This is where the relationship building process takes place. Who is a significant person there's a typo there, in your world right now? Just take it in any direction you want to. And if there's a lot of trust in a team that has worked together for quite a while, you might offer one of these questions. So, what is your greatest challenge these days? What would you like us to know about you that would make the biggest difference today? That question really allows someone to say, I'm going through something very hectic, and so I'm feeling a bit scattered brain at the moment. So excuse me about that. But it allows us to have empathy and understanding for what one of our teammates might be going through. That question at the last one is a very deep one. What do you assume about yourself most of the time that is probably limiting your life? If that's a bit too revealing, limiting your work, and keep it professional as well. But these questions allow for some digging below the surface to happen based on the level of trust of a team. Then we get to the dynamic layer, the doing layer of a gathering. And here I would afford about 50 to 60% of the time we have available. The main purpose of this dynamic layer is where perhaps in our team meeting example, this is where the team leader shares some critical information about the organization at the moment, perhaps a decision that was taken by the leadership that needs to be communicated to the team that might have an impact on the work that they do. And so this dynamic layer could be some small input, 5 minutes or so by the leader of the team. Then there could be an opportunity for a peer conversation. So how does this information impact the work that we do as a team? Just let people talk to each other first before they open the discussion, because it allows people to actually get it out, to talk about what is that impact that it has on their work. And then you could have some discussion points around this topic after everyone has had an opportunity to speak to each other about it and frame it as sort of questions, because questions frame the conversation. If you just make a point on an agenda, it could go in any direction. But if you put a question like this for the discussion, it focuses a little bit and makes this dynamic layer a bit more productive and a bit more focused. So example questions here. What are my top 3 priorities at the moment? What am I working on that I need help with? You can see here that these 2 questions are not just like, okay, what are you busy with? Give us your soliloquy of your work at the moment so you can appear busy to everyone else. But it really focuses the conversation here. What are my top 3 priorities so we can get a clear sense? And I love that second question. What am I working on that I need help with? That really requires a conversation and not just an email. What is a key question that I have concerning my top priorities at the moment? Again, it allows for the team to actually discuss something that would be of importance for the team to discuss in this dynamic layer. Then there is the second thing that I think a lot of people miss in gatherings, and this is a processing layer. And here I would have thought about 20 to 30% probably at the end, but it could be throughout the gathering as well. And 3 examples of how you can allow people to process the information. It's the sense-making part. So what does this mean for us as a team? What does it mean for my work, given what we've just discussed? Create the space for people to talk about that and to share it. Again, here you can use thinking pairs, literally just let 2 people have a conversation amongst themselves all together, give them some time, 5 minutes to discuss this. So some example questions there. What is something that came up in today's conversation I want to give more thought to now? How does our conversation today impact my work going forward? You can see the processing taking place verbally also there with everyone. You could do a closing round. You can say, allow everyone in the team to answer this question. You can give them a time limit and say, in 1 minute, please answer this question. What is an awareness that I'm taking with me from today's conversation? Or you can, if that's not appropriate, give people individual time to make sense of what was discussed. Literally give people 1 minute to write down, okay, so what is the next step they want to take based on the conversation we had today? Is there a follow-up conversation they want to have with someone in this group based on what we discussed? Or just allow them to take notes for themselves. This processing layer is so important because I feel like we are in a time where it's so back-to-back and it's so rushing from the one thing to the next that people don't have time to make sense of what was discussed. And it is in the sense-making part that meaning is linked to gatherings. So that I can ask myself, okay, so what does this mean for me? And that reinforces the purpose of a gathering. There are 5 layers again. And if we had to apply this to our agenda of a 60-minute meeting, this is what the timing might look like. Now, this slide assumes you have clarity about the purpose, you have clarity about the outcomes, and then this is what your 60 minutes could look like. There's a welcome and a check-in round with one of those questions, depending on the layers of trust in a group. Maybe there's some information sharing. That's the dynamic layer taking place. Then there's perhaps a paired conversation for 10 minutes. Then there's discussion rounds with crafted questions that the leader has thought about. And then perhaps there's a closing round where people can share, okay, so what does this mean for them? And just like that, you have greatly increased all aspects of the meeting. If we think about Daniel Kim's cycle, there's relationship building, there's quality time to think together, and there's sense making. And you will probably be able to take higher quality actions together so that you can deliver higher quality results and have more impactful gatherings. And all it is putting some thought into how it is we want to gather.